I grew up in Warragul. We moved to Ballarat when I was about year 9. Went to Ballarat High School. Did my nursing training in my mid-20s. Worked at St John's for 17 years, and I worked the last 12 years at the base hospital. I have 2 children, 2 boys, Samuel and Angus, and with my husband Alistair. Sam's just turned 25 and Angus has just turned 24. Done various bits of nursing. Worked as a surgical urology nurse over at St John's. Then had a bit of a career change and started working radiology over at Ballarat Health Services, which I've worked up until I retired at the end of last year. Basically, so I was the co-nurse unit manager of that department when I retired. So radiology is medical imaging, so where people go to have their CT scans and their X-rays, ultrasounds, MRI scans. And the doctors there do a lot of procedures which we help them with, so they'll do a lot of work on biopsying of tumours on people that have cancers or things that they're trying to diagnose what they are. They do injections into people's joints and muscles for back pain, some minor surgical procedures, various things that you don't expect happen in an X-ray department, which isn't just taking X-rays of people, basically. So the nurses are there to help the patients and help the doctor if the patient's having a procedure done, pretty much. So it's quite a busy sort of area. It's very interesting because it's becoming more, medical imaging is becoming more and more involved in lots of tests and lots of diagnostic things for finding out what's wrong with people and treating them rather than surgeries or leading up to surgery and all that sort of stuff. So it's a good, interesting area to work in. You see lots of stuff. The people that you work with are fun. You're sort of helping and reassuring people quite a lot, but on a short-term basis. So it's not like somebody that's in a ward in hospital that's that you might look after for several days or has had surgery or something. So often people just have minor things that are day-to-day things that can fix easily, or people that are going through sort of treatments for other things. If they've got a tumour or something like that, you might see quite often for their scans, for their tests to diagnose them. So, there's a lot of reassurance and probably education and stuff like that with people. And it's a transient population, so it's ever changing, so it's quite fast-paced and different, but you're not looking after people, the same person for days on end sort of thing, so it's very different to ward nursing. It also has some benefits for nurses because it's a Monday to Friday job, which is pretty rare in nursing, which is kind of nice when you're older, not having to work night duty and stuff like that, so it fits in well at home as well. Sometimes when you're talking about it without a person there, you probably look at it quite analytically and scientifically, but when you actually put the person to the case or the disease or the problem that's going on, you realise there's a very personal element to it. And I think that's something with nursing is, in particular, is that treating the person as the person and not the disease or the problem is something I think nurses are quite good at, and although I get a lot of satisfaction out of actually looking after the person and having a bit of perhaps compassion or empathy or whatever, just reassuring them and making it easier for them, because they're quite frightening for people coming and having tests and all that sort of thing. So I don't know. It's just, and it was a very enjoyable place to work with, a very good work environment, quite autonomous, which is kind of good. You get to use a lot of skills, which had a lot of autonomy in your nursing, so it wasn't quite as regimented as perhaps some other sorts of nursing are too, I guess. We met when we were in our early 20s, and he was actually sharing a house with a fellow that one of my sisters was going out with, and so she introduced us and just went from there. So that was kind of nice. Probably one of the better things my sister's done for me. So we were sort of probably 24, I guess, when we met. I thought he was very nice looking, even though he had a sleazy moustache. Was the day of sleazy moustaches, but I don't know. He was very quiet, but he was just interesting and he was nice looking, and I don't know, I just liked him. I think it sort of just evolved. Because he lived on the farm, so was only in Ballarat on the weekends, so he would just keep turning up at the pub that we used to drink at, and I think we just sort of gradually got together over a period of, after about 12 months, we were definitely a serious relationship, and a very swift, another 7 years later, we got married. So it was a very long romance or courtship or whatever it was. But yeah, it just, I don't know, it just sort of happened. I don't think anyone made a first move, I don't know. The Welcome Nugget, which is now, what is it, Table 48 or something, isn't it? That was our local pub, yeah. So it started off, just going to parties and hanging around at the weekends, and then we all wandered off on a holiday together, and then you sort of stop going to parties and just stay home and do stuff together and start cooking dinner and doing all these domesticated kind of things, and just kept travelling on like that, I suppose, for a few years. That was just what we did. So it was for a long time it was a weekend relationship mainly, because he was on the farm all week and came into Ballarat on the weekends, and then I worked half the weekends, of course, as well. So yeah, I think just a normal, nothing startling, just a normal run-of-the-mill sort of stayed together, and that was the way it is. But we sort of, I don't know, I guess we became good friends as much as partners and everything anyway, so we were always very happy just with each other's company for a very long time. So we got married and had kids, and I guess even getting married and having kids was getting to the age that, oh yes, we must be that age, we better get on with that. So just sort of got around to it. So it was a sort of a very, I don't know, just probably like our whole relationship, it just evolved slowly. Just said, oh well, better do this now, and did it. He worked on the family farm with his parents, so he became partner in the farm with his parents. So there was Alistair and his sister. His sister's a lawyer, so she left school and went to university and became a lawyer, and he stayed after a couple of years sort of working for elders and stuff. He went home on the farm and worked on the farm ever since. So in conjunction with his parents, they ran it. So that was sheep mainly, wool and lambs and a bit of cropping. So that was his job until he had to stop work. I've learned over time that you overcome the dislikes fairly easily, eventually. You either wear them down or you become very similar. I don't know, you get used to them. I always liked him because he's just a very kind, intuitive kind of person. He's a very non-judgmental person. He seemed to be very sensitive to women. I think when growing up there was a lot of, I suppose there always is, but a lot of chauvinism and attitudeism towards women that he never ever exhibited. He was never sort of a, derogatory or impolite. Seemed to understand women quite a bit, which I thought was kind of interesting for a young male in his 20s, I guess. He's a terrible procrastinator. That would probably be his biggest fault. I think that he would, was always going to do something, or will do something, or said he would do something and he would never do it. So that was probably the biggest dislike, I suppose. But you even get used to that because you just expect that that's going to happen after a while. We're good friends. He's very intelligent, so we used to have, some really good conversations and enjoyed each other's company a lot. We could spend a lot of time together just quite comfortably. So that's it. He had a bit of a temper at times, as people do, but got used to that as well. You usually tell him to cut that rot out and that'd be it, be over. And he never held a grudge, ever, which was annoying if we had a fight, because he wouldn't get angry and I would. So you couldn't rile him enough, but anyway. Travelling, definitely. Cooking, he really liked cooking. We both liked cooking a bit, him more than me, but we used to love sort of cooking things up. He had a real great love of music, so certainly changed my perceptions of music quite a bit. He was quite into alternative music and stuff, so we did see a few bands and listened to very different music to everybody else that we knew, but did convert quite a few family and friends as well, so had a bit of fun. I think the first thing he introduced me to was the Hoodoo Gurus. It was probably the first band, because I'd only ever listened to, your traditional Power FM rubbish sort of stuff. So the Hoodoo Gurus would have been the first thing. I think probably he also liked rock music. I remember George Thorogood and we saw quite a few bands in the Huxton Creepers and Died Pretty and lots of stuff like that, as well as the traditional sort of stuff like AC/DC and all that sort of thing he liked. But he knew lots and lots about music. He read music magazines. He bought every record that came out that he liked. That was something that he really liked to do. And always very different music to what other people listen to. So he'd always used to listen to Triple R, we used to listen to back then and stuff like that. So very involved in music, except he always liked to go to sleep with music and I didn't. So that was tricky for a while, but I won. So that's all right. That was a very slow process, which in hindsight you can pin back further than what it was and think, oh gosh, you know, that obviously was going on then still, but probably when he was around about 50, 51, he became a little bit socially withdrawn and would just do slightly different things. Like he wasn't, you know, you'd have guests for dinner or family there and he would just go off and sit at his computer and do something, or we'd go to someone's place and he'd go and sit in the other room and listen to their music and do, you know, that might be his sisters or somewhere or wherever we were. But he just sort of withdrew a bit socially, and it wasn't noticeable. It was just more like you thought, you're being very rude. What are you doing that for? And he was still perfectly capable of managing most everything else. That was probably the first thing. And then he started doing a few strange things, like signing up to strange things on the internet, like some mental health healing thing. So I think things were coming through on the email and the internet, and he was just responding to them and answering them and signing himself up to things. He was doing sort of strange things like that, but not actually doing the things he should have been doing. So that was hidden for quite a while. It was sort of interesting, because we went through a period, I reckon, for a couple of years of not knowing something wasn't quite right, but not knowing what was wrong, and that went the gamut of depression, which he had suffered from in the past, which is what he got treated for a long time before we found out he had dementia. But also, you know, there was questions, you know, is our marriage failing and is something going wrong and he doesn't want anything to do with the family anymore and all that sort of thing. We had him tested for deafness because he would never answer you, so he gradually, you know, he'd just ignore what you were saying, and, you know, the kids particularly struggled with that. Why aren't you listening to me? Why aren't you answering me? But he clearly, it wasn't connecting in his mind. So we had him tested for everything from stress, deafness, disinterest. He became quite apathetic and disinterested in stuff that he was normally interested in, so that was sort of the main thing. And by that stage our children were in secondary school in Ballarat, so we spent the kids and I spent half the week in Ballarat and were going home at the weekends, and he would come into Ballarat one night midweek and then we'd go home on the weekend. So a lot of that we probably missed for a while, and for a while, you know, his mother would say, oh, Alistair's not behaving right, I'm worried about him, because he'd do things like, when we weren't there, you know, he wouldn't open the blinds in the house and he wouldn't go to work on time and all of that sort of stuff. But there was sort of a miscommunication there, I think, with us. I didn't really pick up on that as being a problem, you know, as being part of what the problem was. So basically he started going to the psychiatrist for a while, so I went to the doctor and spoke to the doctor, saying there's something wrong, I don't know what it is, you know, whether it was the stress of pressure of the farm and all that sort of thing, or what it was. And the doctor said, well, I can't talk to him unless he talks to me. And I said, well, he'll talk to you. And we went in and spoke to the doctor, but he got referred to a psychiatrist, which he went to on his own. And he would come home and tell me, yeah, I had a good visit at the psychiatrist and it was fine, blah, blah, blah. So it went on for about 12 months, just going to the psychiatrist. And then he stopped going to the psychiatrist, and he told me that the psychiatrist said he didn't need to see him anymore. And by this time he was still probably doing more, just not quite right things, like he'd turn up 2 hours late, you know, so I'll be here at 6 o'clock and he'd come at 8 o'clock, or there was one time we were going out to dinner with friends and he was supposed to be in Ballarat at 6 o'clock and he wasn't there, and I rang him and he said, oh, I'm in the truck, and he was driving back from northern Victoria with a truckload of sheep. I said, well, what are you doing that for? But his father had said to him, you need to go and pick these sheep up. So he totally forgot or disregarded that he already had plans and dropped that, because he had started at that stage, I guess, to whatever was put into his head is what he acted on. So as soon as another thought got into his head, he would act on that and forget the previous thought. So there was a few things like that where he wasn't turning up on time, or he'd forget to come in, or stuff like that was a bit weird, but it still took a while to realise there was something wrong. It wasn't until I actually went and spoke to the psychiatrist and told him some of the things he'd been doing that the psychiatrist said, I think there's a bit more than depression going on here, that he probably needs some cognitive testing. So that's how we ended up finally getting on the path to the diagnosis of dementia, but that took probably 2 years, really, which is not uncommon. Having talked to many other people, I think that's fairly common, particularly with younger people, I think, because that's not what doctors are looking for. And because he was, 95% functional, I guess. So it was just these weird behavioural things that you could excuse or put away for various other reasons. It was sort of scary and shocking, and sometimes being a nurse is good because you know a bit, and sometimes it's bad because you know a bit. So it's just like a double-edged sword. You can know a bit too much, but not enough to come to a good thing. It was, in some ways, it was good to know that there was something wrong and they were finding out what it was. And I really, like most people, didn't really have a good grasp on what dementia was, apart from, the normal stuff of people losing their memory and, forgetting where they're going and all that sort of stuff, which he didn't lose, actually. It's a different type of dementia. But going through all the tests and stuff was okay. So that sort of stuff was easy for me to do because, he had scans and all that sort of stuff, which I was familiar with. So that sort of thing was easy. But actually coming to terms with the fact that he's got dementia was that was very shocking and sort of quite frightening, but still had a complete unawareness of really what the future was going to hold, because you really don't know much about it. And even once you've got a diagnosis, there's not a lot of education or preparation for you to do it. It's sort of a learn moment by moment, and what you learn for yourself sort of thing once the assessments and all that sort of stuff. So I had a lot of assessing. So that was all quite stressful, but he was still very functional. So he had a cognitive function test that he got 92 out of 100 on, sort of thing. So he was really still functioning very well. It was just some of this odd behaviour that would happen. So while that was going, once we got the diagnosis of what was wrong, you sort of think, all right, well, we know what we're dealing with now and we have to learn to live with it. And telling people, that was very difficult. But again, because he seemed mostly normal, it wasn't so bad. The harder part was dealing with the parts of dementia when he wasn't behaving right, and coping with that was not easy to cope with that in a sensible, manageable way. So there was a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of tears, I suppose. Because it's very hard to look at a person that can do most things, but then completely can't do something else, and you think, why can't you do that? It's very hard to understand why you can't do that. So you can do that, you can drive a car, you can go to work, you can do this, you can do that, but you can't turn around and put that saucepan in that cupboard over there, or shut that cupboard door behind you, or answer me when I talk to you. And so that was very difficult to deal with. So I've found that the more the dementia progressed, the easier it was for me to come to terms with it and deal with it and realise that this was something that he couldn't help. So I think very hard to see when someone's still quite functional that they can't help the things that they can't do right, that that's not intentional, that they're not being difficult or obstructive or what have you. It's just their mind just doesn't work. And he couldn't explain it, because we used to talk about that, and I'd say, what does it feel like, in your mind? Does your mind feel different or anything? But he couldn't articulate anything like that. So no. But he would repeat what I said. So I said, do you feel foggy in your head? So he'd say, well, yes, I do feel foggy in my head. But he was actually only really repeating what I was wanting, because he wanted to say, he wanted to agree with me. And that was part of his dementia too. I'd say, if we're going somewhere because I can't read maps, is this the right way? He'd say, yes, the one it wouldn't be. Whereas he'd never ever used to get lost and things like that. So those sort of things took a lot getting used to. But I guess as things progressed and he became less able to do things, I could cope better, because I had to, and two, because I could see it, I guess, and come to terms more with it, that he needed the help. So, plus support groups and things like that, which were good. I'm far more tolerant than I ever was. I stress far less about things that aren't worth stressing about. I don't get as embarrassed by stuff, or I'm not as self-conscious as I was, because when you're sort of living with somebody with dementia and trying to still give them as normal a life as you can, some things can be quite confronting, but I found because I needed to protect him and look after him that I was able to do things that I probably would have felt very self-conscious about beforehand. I think it's... People say you grow and you learn, and it's probably true. I think I've become a better person for having to look after him and for wanting to look after him, and to, I think, become far more compassionate too when you see how totally helpless and dependent a person can be, but what a difference you can make if you can make that better for them. And I suppose most of, as things progressed, was all about giving him as much experience and quality and pleasure out of life as I could do. I found it actually surprised me that I was able to do that relatively well most of the time, which isn't saying that it was easy. It's a lot of work, but I find that if you're doing it for somebody that you want and need to do it for, that's probably easier than doing it for somebody that you don't or won't or can't do that for. But it's you also get a certain satisfaction out of making an experience all right or okay or good for somebody that can't make that happen for themselves, I think. So I think I've learned a lot, and I've learned a lot of tolerance for other people and other things and other situations that I may have had less interest or tolerance for, which is probably a plus out of that sort of thing, I guess. So, some things are quite funny, or you have to see the funny side of them to sometimes to cope with them and to deal with them, but to actually get some pleasure out of a situation that might be a bit tricky anyway. I found all along that, especially early on, people would look at Alistair quite oddly, as people often do, sort of look or think, oh, there's something not quite right there, it's a normal human response, what's going on with that man over there who looks perfectly normal but's doing something strange. But I did find that when you actually say to people, he has got dementia, so he may do something that's not quite usual, most people were very accepting of that, which surprised me, which was quite good. And a experience comes to mind of me in Darwin, because he would stop and stare at people because he would just see somebody doing something and just want to know what was going on. And we were actually on a holiday in Darwin, and we were in a tourist information bureau, and he was looking at this Aboriginal gentleman who got quite confronted about him staring at him, and started to have a go at him. But I said to this man, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's got a disability, his mind's not working right." And the bloke said, "Oh, that's fine." It was just, that was actually a gorgeous moment. Some of the other things he's done, we were shopping in Wilson's one day, and he just grabbed an apple and started eating it as he was walking around the shop. The staff, I explained to them, and I said, "Oh, I'm happy to pay for it." He said, "Oh, no, don't worry about it, it's fine." But he did become a little bit of a shoplifter there for a while. If we went into a supermarket, he'd be grabbing chocolate bars on the way out and various things. He had, my sister actually took him one time to the yacht club for a coffee, but he grabbed a muffin off the counter and ate it one day, and she didn't have enough money to pay for it. This lady in the line behind her gave her the rest of the money to pay for the muffin, which was quite funny. That sort of thing. He didn't do anything too terrible most of the time, but there are instances where things were not quite right that can be a bit embarrassing if you're down the street. But you do soon learn to not be embarrassed by stuff like that. Dementia, he's quite progressed in his dementia now, so he's in residential care at Bill Crawford Lodge, which is who do an amazing job. They're fantastic up there, the staff. So I feel very comfortable that he's safe and well cared for and well liked by all the staff up there, which is very reassuring. But he doesn't speak. He will occasionally say a word, but he's been non-verbal from quite early on in his dementia. It's part of his type of dementia. So he doesn't speak much at all. He still smiles, but he needs to be fed. He's full nursing care. He can walk it's very difficult to get him to stand up. Once you get him stand up and get him steady, he can walk, but he doesn't initiate walking or doing anything like that for himself. So he's basically full care for feeding, dressing, everything to do with normal activities in life. So but we'd still get the amazing smile every now and again, even if it's only just as you walk in the door, and you mightn't get it for the rest of the day, but it's still there. So yeah, it's quite advanced at this stage. So he's quite, for a 58-year-old man, he's sort of very stiff and very rigid in his movements. He's quite a bit of contracture in his arms and stuff like that. So that's quite difficult. Most of the time, all right. Have good days and bad days. It's probably how I feel, depends how he is. So if he's happy and comfortable and we've had a nice walk and he's smiling, I'm all right. If he's, doesn't look comfortable or looks a bit sad, then I'm not all right. So it's very much dependent on how he is, how I am most of the time, but mostly all right. He's had quite a bit of a deterioration in the last couple of months, so that takes a little while to get used to the next level of deterioration. Once you get used to that, you just adjust. And that's what it's been like all along. He's gone from, where we could walk around the lake to, we could walk to the corner, to we can walk around the block, to take him for a walk in a wheelchair. And you just adjust as you go along, and once you get used to it, you just adapt what you're doing. So even when he was still living at home, we just changed what we did. We went from going away on holidays to not having holidays, and we went from going out to dinner to eating at home or at friends' place, and then when that didn't work, we eat at our place. And you just have to adjust your lifestyle to fit, to suit them, and you can still have a lot of good times. So they are smaller and not as dramatic as they might have been, but they're still there. It's different for everybody, but I've found getting help from other people has been really helpful. I was quite lucky. So Alistair was diagnosed back in 2012, and certainly then there was a young onset dementia support group had just started in Ballarat through Alzheimer's Victoria, which I joined. I think the other people with dementia, with partners with dementia, were the ones that helped us. So the Alzheimer's Australia were the facilitators of it and brought us all together. But as a group, we all helped each other very much, and there's 4 of us in particular that are very good friends now. 2 of them's partners have now passed away, but we still spend a lot of time together and talk to each other and compare notes, I guess, as we often say. Nobody knows it unless they've lived it, and we can understand things on a level that you wouldn't even let your family know about. So I found, even going to those meetings in the early stage where we only ever saw each other at meetings, that it sort of just lightened the load somewhat. You'd go to a meeting and sit and chat for 2 hours, and you could talk about things that had happened, and you could laugh or cry about them, and it was okay to say anything, or that you couldn't cope or you couldn't do this, which you can't really do to family and that necessarily. Certainly not all the time. That it would sort of seem to lighten the load for a couple of days. You'd feel really good for a couple of days and go home and think, oh yes, I can do it again, and keep coping. So I think taking help where it's there instead of thinking you can do it on your own is good. I think that's very good advice for most people, because even though we all like to think we can do it on our own, and I thought I would be able to keep Alistair here forever, and that hasn't happened. You just can't, because it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there are a lot of things. Like it becomes very socially isolating. It becomes very partner-centric. Everything focuses around how you're dealing with your partner with dementia and how you're keeping them safe and you safe and fed and maintaining your household and your lifestyle and doing all that sort of stuff. And there's really no room much left for anything else. So anything that gives you a day's respite does not mean you're copping out. It means it's giving you a break, but it's also giving them a break and something different from you too, because it goes both ways. Alistair went to Aya's house for 2.5 years, which is a day centre for people with dementia, but he made really good friends with the other young onset dementia people there, because they were all at a stage where they still had enough cognitive ability to relate to each other, and they all became friends. So he had a friendship group within his capabilities of maintaining, as well as the fact that that also gave me some time off to, do things that you might want to do or need to do, or have some time out or do whatever. So I think getting help and advice as much as you can cope or tolerate is very important, and you do hear and see of a lot of people struggling to try and cope with it. And while there are services and government funding and all that, it's nowhere near enough for people to really manage at home with somebody with dementia once the dementia's getting quite advanced. So I suppose that's my main thing I would say to people, and it's all right to be angry, it's all right to be sad, but you also get a lot of happy moments out of it as well, and you get a different experience. I think the biggest thing I get out of it, I was thinking about the other day, is that I probably love my husband more than I probably ever would have if we'd had a normal, if we'd had a normal progression of a marriage, because you get beyond, fights, arguments, pettiness. You certainly miss the social company and all that sort of stuff, but still having the physical presence is still nice as well. But it's a different kind of, it's not even about being a carer, it's just about how you feel about that person, it's just so different. I don't know whether it's because you need to be there for them or can be there for them, that it's like a protective thing. I don't know. It might be sort of like a parental thing. I'm not sure, but I think certainly getting whatever help you think you might need and not being too proud to ask for it is probably the best piece of advice I can give anybody that's going through it. He's lost the part of his life that was supposed to be our, special time of life. Our children had grown up and had just gone to university. The dementia had started before that, like when they were in year 11 and year 12. We were going to travel and do all sorts of things, which we still did, but changed how we did it, and we still had a good time. And despite the fact that I've lost my husband as a husband, in the sense of the word of that we're living our lives together now, as empty nesters or whatever, and doing whatever we like and financially comfortable and all that sort of stuff, I'm so sort of sad and angry that he's missed out on what he should have been able to do. So he's worked his whole life and we've brought up our family, and we should have been doing all those things together. And even though we did some things in a modified version, he's missed all that choice and the opportunities to sort of really enjoy some of the things that he had planned and wanted to do at a very young age, at an age where it shouldn't really have happened, sort of in his 50s when he should have been, I guess, in his prime of life. And I'm angry that he's missed that opportunity. I'm angry and sad, I guess, at life, that life's robbed him of that opportunity. But I'm not angry with him. It's always better the first time, isn't it?